This is the story of a woman who spent 3 decades mastering the art of invisible manipulation, only to be dismantled in a single afternoon by the very system she thought she had finally conquered. What Camilla realized behind closed doors, staring at a routine digital access portal that suddenly refused to recognize her administrative clearance, was not just that a computer system had been updated. It was the terrifying, blood-chilling realization that the illusion of her absolute power had just evaporated. The private channel she had spent months building to secretly elevate her non-royal children had been abruptly sealed. There was no warning. There was no screaming argument in the halls of Clarence House. There was only the cold, sterile reality of a revoked pass, a locked door, and the devastating silence of an institution that had just permanently turned its back on her. In less than 24 hours, everything changed. This video will unpack the most shameless and staggering power grab the modern British monarchy has ever witnessed. We are going to examine the shadow bureaucracy Camilla attempted to build while King Charles was fighting cancer. The exact moment Princess Anne uncovered the hidden paper trail and the silent, ruthless institutional retaliation executed by Prince William. Most importantly, we will uncover the devastating realization that Camilla now faces. She may wear the crown, but she actually owns absolutely nothing. And the heirs she spent years trying to sideline have just trapped her in an administrative prison from which she can never escape. To truly understand the crushing weight of this downfall, you have to look at the staggering heights of the illusion she had built. For 30 years, Camilla played the long game. She survived the explosive scandals of the 90s. She weathered the public outrage following the tragic death of Diana, and she slowly, methodically clawed her way into the inner sanctum of the royal family. She believed she had Charles completely controlled, relying on his deep emotional dependency to shield her from the strict protocols of the institution. She felt untouchable. The peak of this hubris was broadcast to the entire world in May of 2023. During the coronation, Camilla did not just stand beside Charles. She pushed her bloodline straight into the most sacred visual real estate the monarchy possesses. 3 of her grandsons were appointed as official pages of honor, and they stood on the Buckingham Palace balcony right alongside Prince George and Princess Charlotte. To the casual observer, it looked like a heartwarming display of a blended modern family. But behind palace walls, it was viewed as a staggering exploitation of protocol. Camilla had placed her non-royal family in working royal spaces, testing the waters, creating a visual proof of concept. She was erasing the boundaries that Queen Elizabeth had spent a lifetime enforcing. Camilla felt an overwhelming sense of victory. She believed the public had forgotten the past, and she believed the institution was finally hers to mold. But what nobody knew was that the balcony was just a test run. The real operation was happening entirely in the dark. King Charles was diagnosed with cancer, plunging the palace into an immediate state of crisis. Every senior official, every courtier, and every working royal was entirely consumed by the king's survival and the continuity of the crown. It was a period of profound vulnerability for the family, but for Camilla, it was the perfect blind spot. While her husband was navigating the most frightening period of his life, exhausted and heavily medicated, Camilla went to work. She instructed her private office to begin drafting permanent official honours for her children, Tom Parker Bowles and Laura Lopes. She was not asking for minor favours, she was targeting honours the king could grant at his sole discretion, bypassing parliament and public debate entirely. The audacity of this move was breathtaking, especially when you consider the promise made 2 decades prior. When Queen Elizabeth finally permitted Charles to marry Camilla in 2005, the late Queen imposed a strict, non-negotiable condition. Camilla's children from her previous marriage would never hold titles, never hold official roles, and never be integrated into the institutional hierarchy. That was the price of admission. For nearly 20 years, Camilla swallowed her resentment, maintaining a carefully constructed mask of dutiful compliance while Elizabeth lived. But the moment the Queen passed, Camilla treated that sacred promise as if it had expired. To execute her plan without drawing immediate fire, Camilla invented a completely fictitious administrative category. She called it extended household members with ceremonial eligibility. It was a bureaucratic ghost ship designed specifically to smuggle Tom and Laura into the royal ecosystem. Her loyal staff began slipping reclassification papers into the massive stacks of routine daily documents presented to the ailing king. On days when Charles was too fatigued from his treatments to read every single line of a 50-page administrative packet, he trusted his staff to highlight anything critical. Camilla's operatives ensured these specific papers blended seamlessly into the mundane, operational updates. If Charles signed them, the foundation for her children's permanent elevation would be legally binding, setting off a chain reaction that would be virtually impossible to reverse without triggering a catastrophic public scandal. The plan was airtight, completely invisible to the outside world, and relying on the very real fact that nobody wanted to burden a sick king with administrative paranoia. But Camilla made one fatal miscalculation. She underestimated the institutional memory and the fierce, unyielding loyalty of the palace staff. A mid-level courtier, a dedicated civil servant who had processed palace paperwork for over 3 decades, noticed a subtle anomaly. The language in a set of documents originating from Camilla's office did not match standard royal protocol. It was a minor discrepancy, a phrasing issue regarding clearance levels for civilian attendees at state functions. But to a veteran of the royal household, it was a glaring red flag. The staff member attempted to raise the issue through the proper channels, flagging it for their immediate supervisor. Days later, the paperwork returned approved and completely sanitized with no explanation given. In that chilling moment, the staff member realized the chain of command was already compromised. Camilla's influence had infected the supervisory levels. Going through the standard protocols was useless. There was only one person inside the entire monarchy who possessed the authority to investigate and the absolute immunity from Camilla's influence. The staff member bypassed their department, entirely requested a private audience, and laid the anomalous paperwork directly on the desk of Princess Anne. Princess Anne does not operate on emotion, she does not leak stories to the press, and she does not engage in petty household skirmishes. When she saw the documents, she did not immediately march into Charles's office to complain. Instead, she initiated a ghost audit. For weeks, she silently traced every single administrative request, every personnel adjustment, and every protocol shift originating from Camilla's office over the previous 6 months. She pulled records stored completely outside the standard palace filing systems. She moved with a cold forensic precision, building a comprehensive dossier of institutional overreach that was entirely undeniable. The deeper Anne dug, the more horrifying the reality became. She uncovered the fictitious ceremonial category. She traced the deliberate manipulation of the king's daily signing boxes. But the piece of evidence that stopped Anne completely cold was a draft document outlining the operational roster for an upcoming highly significant state event. They're written clearly in a slot historically reserved exclusively for working members of the royal family was the name Laura Lopes. It was not a suggestion, it was a scheduled implementation. Camilla was weeks away from making her daughter a permanent fixture of state ceremony. Anne gathered the completed audit. It was no longer a suspicion, it was a weaponized dossier of absolute proof. But Anne knew that presenting this to Camilla directly would only result in denial and manipulation. She knew Camilla's ultimate defense mechanism was to run to Charles, playing the victim, banking on his inability to deny her anything. To spring the trap successfully, Anne had to sever that lifeline first. In a move of devastating tactical brilliance, Anne went to the king. The details of that private meeting remained strictly confined to the walls of the king's private study, but the outcome shifted the power dynamic of the monarchy forever. Anne presented the undeniable proof of Camilla's exploitation of his illness. She laid out the fraudulent documents, the compromised staff, and the direct violation of the promise he had made to his dying mother. And then she issued an ultimatum: if Charles attempted to intervene, if he made a single move to shield his wife from the consequences of this betrayal, Anne would take the entire audit outside the immediate household. She would formally present it to the Accession Council and the sovereign's private constitutional advisors. It would cease to be a family matter and would immediately become a constitutional crisis. Charles, weary, heartbroken, and confronted with the undeniable proof of his wife's staggering deception, gave Anne exactly what she demanded. He gave her his silence. Armed with the king's passive surrender, Anne walked directly to Clarence's house. She did not raise her voice, she simply placed the audit on the table in front of Camilla. She exposed every hidden channel, every manipulated document, and the draft roster featuring Laura Lopes. The illusion of absolute power shattered in an instant. The invisible empire Camilla had spent months building in the dark was dragged into the unforgiving light. Cornered and panicking, Camilla reached for the only weapon she had ever truly relied upon. She demanded to speak to her husband. She needed Charles to step in to overrule his sister to protect her, as he had done for decades. And that is when Princess Anne delivered the psychological death blow. She looked Camilla directly in the eyes and informed her that Charles had already seen the file. He knew everything and he had chosen not to come. Camilla was left entirely alone in that room, staring at the physical evidence of her ruined ambition, suffocating in the devastating realization that her husband had abandoned her to the wolves. But Anne was only the architect of the trap. She was not the executioner. That role belonged to the man whose mother's legacy Camilla had spent a lifetime trying to erase. Princess Anne gathered the files, left Clarence's house, and walked the evidence straight into the office of Prince William, leaving Camilla trapped in a breathless, agonizing wait for the hammer to fall. When Prince William opened the dossier his aunt had placed on his desk, he did not display a shred of the explosive anger he was known for in his youth. Instead, what emerged was something far more dangerous to Camilla. It was the cold, surgical precision of a future king who finally had the absolute institutional justification to dismantle the woman who had spent decades trying to rewrite his family's history. William looked at the fictitious ceremonial categories, the manipulated signing boxes, and the draft roster featuring Laura Lopes. And he answered the threat with an administrative lethality that shocked even the most hardened palace courtiers. Within hours of receiving the file, William initiated a demolition so rapid and so complete that by the end of the afternoon, the shadow empire Camilla had spent months building was completely eradicated. He did not ask for meetings, he did not request a royal summit. He simply used his authority as the Prince of Wales to order the immediate deletion of the extended household ceremonial category from every internal server and physical handbook. Every title exploration document regarding Tom Parker Bowles and Laura Lopes was permanently terminated. The pathways Camilla had painstakingly constructed piece by invisible piece were vaporized in a single afternoon. But William was not satisfied with merely stopping her. He intended to make sure she could never reach for that kind of power again. William implemented an entirely new binding administrative protocol across the royal household. He mandated that any future modifications to royal attendance classification security clearances, or ceremonial eligibility, must be routed directly through his private office for authorization before taking effect anywhere within the institution. He effectively placed himself as a permanent formal checkpoint over the Queen Consort's administrative reach. He did not just close the back door she had been using, he sealed it with concrete and installed himself as the guard. For the first time in modern royal history, a Prince of Wales had structurally legally contained a sitting Queen Consort. This devastating institutional retaliation forced Camilla to confront a reality she had spent 30 years desperately trying to ignore. It exposed the raw commercial desperation underlying her entire existence within the royal family. Camilla has spent decades acting as the matriarch of the monarchy, but the brutal, unspoken truth of her position is that she actually owns absolutely nothing. The illusion of her absolute power relies entirely on her proximity to a king whose health is fragile. Prince William, on the other hand, controls the very ground beneath her feet. As the Duke of Cornwall, William took immediate and exclusive control of the Duchy of Cornwall estate the moment his grandmother died. This is a billion-dollar property portfolio that funds the monarchy's private endeavours and owns vast swaths of land, including Highgrove House, the beloved country estate King Charles has poured his heart into for decades. William is now legally his father's landlord. He controls the leases, he controls the funding, and he controls the physical properties. If King Charles were to pass away, Camilla would instantly become a guest in an institution entirely owned and operated by the son of the woman she replaced. Her frantic push to secure permanent titles for her children was never just about prestige. It was a desperate, calculated scramble for institutional survival. She knew that without irrevocable, legally binding status, Tom and Laura would be completely cut off from royal proximity the moment William ascended the throne. She was trying to anchor her bloodline into the permanent bedrock of the monarchy before her husband's protection expired. William recognized this commercial desperation immediately, and by locking her children out of the system, he guaranteed that her influence will die the exact second her husband's reign concludes. The contrast between Camilla's frantic maneuvering and Catherine's quiet, unassailable power has never been more stark. Catherine has never needed to manipulate a guest list or invent a fake ceremonial category to secure her family's relevance. Her power is organic, permanent, and universally recognized. She is the mother of the future kings. She represents the seamless continuation of the crown and the physical embodiment of Diana's enduring legacy. While Camilla was desperately trying to force her children onto a balcony they did not belong on, Catherine was quietly stepping back from public life to protect her own health, secure in the absolute knowledge that her position is entirely untouchable. The institution protects Catherine naturally, while Camilla has to constantly fight the institution just to survive within it. The psychological toll of this defeat on Camilla has been profound, and the palace has already begun to reflect her diminished status through devastating visual humiliations. These are not public announcements, but silent lethal adjustments that carry immense meaning within the royal ecosystem. Weeks after the operation was dismantled, senior staff members operating out of Camilla's private office quietly had their security credentials downgraded. Their all-access passes, which allowed them to move freely through the private corridors of Buckingham Palace and Windsor Castle, were revoked. They are now required to request guest clearance for specific areas, forcing them to wait at security checkpoints like ordinary external contractors. Furthermore, a prominently displayed photograph of Camilla alongside her children, which had previously sat on a console table in a high-traffic administrative hallway near the King's private study, was quietly removed. When inquiring staff asked where it had gone, they were politely informed it had been placed into storage to make room for an upcoming exhibition of historical royal portraits. To the outside world, these details seem trivial, but inside the palace, the removal of a portrait and the restriction of a physical doorway are the ultimate forensic proof of shifting power. It is the institution politely but firmly showing you the door. Camilla is now living out the consequences of a gamble she should never have taken. The quiet administrative reach she had been building since Queen Elizabeth's death is entirely gone. The invisibility she depended on to maneuver in the dark has been replaced by a system where every single document she touches is heavily scrutinized by William's office. She is trapped in an administrative cage of her own making. But the deepest wound, the one that will haunt her for the rest of her days, inside that palace is the devastating silence of King Charles. When the walls closed in and the trap snapped shut, the man she had anchored her entire life to simply looked away. He chose the crown, he chose his son, and he chose the ghost of his mother's promise over her. Camilla has finally realized that she may have won the long game to become queen, but she is essentially a tenant in a kingdom that belongs entirely to William. The illusion is broken, the Shadow Empire has fallen, and the absolute power she thought she held has been exposed as nothing more than borrowed time. If you found this forensic breakdown of royal power dynamics insightful, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an analysis. The landscape of the British monarchy is shifting faster than ever, and we will be here to uncover exactly what is happening behind the closed doors of the palace